The message arrived at 11:47 p.m. A sharp vibration against ancient oak, disrupting a phone that received only royal dispatches and territorial threats. But this message was different. It came from an unknown number, a child's number. "He's beating my mama. Please help." Alpha King Andrew Kael, seated in his throne room's study surrounded by maps of kingdoms and battle reports, stared at the glowing screen. He frowned beneath his crown, the battle scars on his face deepening with suspicion.
A mistake.
A scam. A wrong number sent to royalty. Then another text arrived. Shorter, shakier.
"I'm Haydn."
He said he'll kill her. Andrew's breath stilled. He had witnessed fear across 1,000 battlefields. He had inspired fear in countless enemies. But he had never seen this, a child begging a stranger because no protector remained. His scarred fingers moved across the screen with the gravity of a royal decree. 3 words only. "I'm on my way."
No hesitation.
No questions. No second thoughts. His royal council froze as he stood, the ceremonial robe sweeping behind him like a war banner. His crown caught the firelight as he moved toward the door. "Your Majesty, the territorial negotiations." He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because something in that child's words, that trembling desperation, had struck a part of him he thought had been buried beneath crown and scar tissue years ago. As his royal transport tore through the city streets, another message appeared. "I hear him calling my name. Please hurry." Andrew's jaw clenched. His pulse hammered beneath the weight of his crown. City lights blurred past like falling stars. By the time he reached the address, he already knew. Tonight, he wasn't arriving as an Alpha King. He was arriving as the only hope that little girl named Lucy had left. And what he found inside that house would redefine everything his crown truly meant. The king behind the scars. Andrew Kael had built his reign on one unbreakable principle: control everything. Trust nothing. Feel nothing. For 18 years, he had ruled his hidden kingdom with an iron will wrapped in royal ceremony. His name alone could silence a war council of battle-hardened warriors. His reputation had been forged from blood, betrayal, and the kind of calculated strength that kept rival kingdoms at bay. The scars across his face told stories he refused to speak aloud, marks of battles won and innocence lost. But sitting in his armored vehicle, racing through unfamiliar streets toward an address he'd never seen, Andrew felt something he hadn't experienced in nearly 2 decades. Uncertainty. The navigation system announced 12 minutes to destination. 12 minutes for a little girl who might not have 12 seconds. His phone vibrated again. The screen illuminated with another message that made something shift beneath his royal armor. "I can't find Mama anymore. There's too much blood." Andrew pressed harder on the accelerator. The engine roared through the quiet neighborhood as streetlights streaked past like golden arrows. He had commanded armies through these same territories countless times before, but never like this. Never with the weight of genuine fear crushing against his ribs. You see, Alpha King Andrew Kael wasn't supposed to care about random children texting wrong numbers to royal lines. He wasn't supposed to care about anything except kingdom security and territorial sovereignty. But that night, speeding toward a crisis he couldn't control through royal decree or military might, he found himself remembering things he had spent years trying to bury beneath his crown. 20 years earlier, Andrew had been a different man entirely. Back then, he was simply Drew, the older brother, the protector, before the kingdom, before the scars, before the crown became his cage. He lived with his younger sister Elena and their father in the outer territories. They weren't royalty then. They were survivors. His father trained soldiers while Andrew looked after Elena between his own combat lessons. He helped her practice reading, made sure she ate, and stood guard while she slept, telling her stories about kings who protected the innocent and kingdoms where the weak were never abandoned. Elena was 7 years old. She had wild curls that tangled when she ran, and a laugh that could brighten their drafty quarters on the coldest winter nights. She believed her big brother could defeat any enemy, solve any problem, chase away any monster lurking in shadows. One autumn evening, Andrew was away at an advanced training session when the raid came. A rogue faction attacked the settlement, targeting military families. The assault was swift, brutal, designed to break morale. Andrew received word from a blood-spattered messenger. There had been an incident at their quarters. The attack had breached their sector. His father and Elena had been caught in the violence. Andrew ran. He ran through training grounds that suddenly felt like graveyards. He ran past familiar posts that now seemed like monuments to his failure. When he reached the medical ward, the torchlight felt like judgment, exposing every moment he hadn't been there to defend them. His father survived with severe wounds. Elena did not. Andrew held his little sister's hand as healers worked frantically around them, their movements growing slower, their voices softer. She looked so small on that cot, so fragile, like a flower crushed beneath armored boots. Before the end, Elena squeezed his hand one final time. She looked up at him with those same trusting eyes that had always believed he could protect her from anything. "Drew," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the chaos. "Promise me you'll help other kids when they're scared." Andrew promised. It was the last conversation they ever had. After her funeral pyre, something fundamental shifted inside Drew. The part of him that believed in honor, in protection, in the possibility that good people could live safe lives died with Elena. What emerged from that grief was colder, harder, more ruthless. He realized that being kind hadn't saved his sister. Being honorable hadn't protected his family. Compassion had failed everyone he loved. So Drew decided to become unchallengeable. He rose through military ranks with calculated precision. He learned how true power worked, who controlled territories, where real authority resided, how fear could accomplish what love could not. Within 5 years, he had transformed from grieving brother to feared commander. Within 10 years, he controlled 3 provinces. Within 15 years, he wore the crown. And somewhere along the way, Drew disappeared entirely. What remained was Alpha King Andrew Kael, a ruler who had built walls around his heart so impenetrable that nothing could breach them. A king who had convinced himself that caring about anyone was a weakness he couldn't afford. Until tonight, the navigation system announced 5 minutes to destination. Andrew's knuckles were white against the steering mechanism, his crown slightly askew. Another text came through. This one was different. Weaker. "I think I'm going to sleep now. I'm really tired." That message hit Andrew like a warhammer to the chest. He recognized the tone immediately. He had heard it before in his sister's voice during those final moments. It was the sound of someone giving up, of a child's body shutting down from trauma and terror. "No," he said aloud to his empty vehicle. "Not tonight. Not again." Andrew grabbed his phone and typed rapidly while steering with one hand, his royal training allowing him to multitask even in crisis. "Stay awake.
Talk to me.
What's your name?" The response came back slowly, each word clearly an effort. "Lucy."
I'm Lucy.
"Lucy, my name is Andrew. I'm almost there. You need to stay awake for me."
Can you do that?
"I'll try."
Good girl.
"Tell me about your mama." "What's her name?"
Catherine.
"Catherine Miller. She makes the best pancakes. She reads me stories every night before bed." Andrew felt something crack inside his chest, somewhere beneath the scars and crown. This little girl, hiding in terror, was talking about bedtime stories and pancakes. She was talking about the kind of normal, beautiful life that Elena never got to finish living. The navigation system announced 1 minute to destination. Andrew could see the address now, a modest 2-story dwelling with a flickering porch light and overgrown garden. Most of the windows were dark, but he could see movement inside. Shadows dancing against drawn curtains. He stopped his vehicle across the street and assessed the scene with battle-trained eyes. No city guards. No medical response. No neighbors peering from windows. Just silence and darkness, and one little girl whose desperate message had reached a king. Andrew adjusted his crown, felt the weight of his ceremonial robe, and stepped out into the night. The Alpha King had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The throne room of Andrew Kael existed in perpetual twilight, illuminated only by ancient sconces that cast long shadows across stone walls etched with the names of conquered territories. Andrew sat alone in this cavernous space most nights, his long dark hair falling past his shoulders, partially obscuring the vicious scars that marked the left side of his face like a map of violence. 3 deep lines ran from temple to jaw, souvenirs from the raid that had stolen everything he loved. The crown resting on his head was not decorative ceremony, but forged from battle-won steel, its weight a constant reminder of the price of power. His kingdom was vast, but invisible to the outside world, a shadow empire built on ancient bloodlines and supernatural strength that ordinary humans could never comprehend. Andrew ruled over thousands who existed in the margins, wolves in human skin, warriors bound by codes older than nations. They feared him. They obeyed him. They would die for him without question. But none of them truly knew him, and that was exactly how Andrew had designed it. The code of absolute control governed every aspect of his existence. Never show weakness. Never form attachments. Never allow emotion to compromise judgment. Never let anyone close enough to become a vulnerability. For 18 years, this code had kept his kingdom stable and his enemies at bay. For 18 years, he had been untouchable, unmovable, a monument to calculated strength wrapped in royal robes and battle scars. His throne room study was organized with military precision. Maps covered one entire wall, marking territories, alliances, potential threats. Another wall displayed weapons from defeated enemies, trophies that served as warnings to anyone who might challenge his authority. His desk held reports on border disputes, resource allocations, requests for royal judgment on matters ranging from territorial boundaries to blood feuds between families. The weight of thousands of lives pressed down on his shoulders every moment, demanding decisions that could never be undone, judgments that would echo through generations. Andrew had been reviewing a particularly complex land dispute when the phone vibrated. The device itself was an anachronism in his ancient study, a concession to necessity that he kept locked in a drawer, checking it only when absolutely required. It received encrypted messages from his network, intelligence reports from scouts, occasionally threats from rival factions testing his resolve. It never received messages from children. The text glowed on the screen like a crack in his carefully constructed armor. "He's beating my mama. Please help." 7 words. 7 simple, desperate words that had somehow bypassed every barrier he erected, slipping through defenses built from grief and guilt and the absolute determination to never, ever feel that helpless again. Andrew stared at those words as if they were written in a language he'd forgotten how to read. In his world, problems were solved with strategy, force, or royal decree. Mothers and children existed in the realm of ordinary human concerns, far removed from the shadows where he conducted his rule. He had built an entire empire specifically to distance himself from such vulnerabilities, to ensure that no plea for help could ever reach him again. But it had. And something ancient stirred beneath his crown, beneath his scars, beneath 18 years of carefully maintained ice. The part of him that had once been Drew, the brother who made promises to dying sisters, recognized the sound of a child's terror. His hand moved toward the phone before his mind could construct all the logical reasons to ignore it. The message arrived as Andrew's vehicle carved through empty streets, the city lights streaking past like falling stars. I hear him calling my name, for more words that landed like physical blows against his chest. He could hear the terror behind them, the sound of a child trying to make herself invisible while danger prowled closer. Andrew's grip tightened on the steering mechanism until his knuckles went white beneath the moonlight. The crown sat heavy on his head, suddenly feeling less like authority and more like accusation. His reflection caught in the darkened window, long hair wild from the wind, scars vivid even in shadow, eyes that had seen too much and felt too little for far too long. But tonight, those scars burned as if freshly carved. The memory rose unbidden, forcing its way through 18 years of carefully constructed walls. He was back in that moment, 15 years old, standing in the training yard while his section was drilled in advanced combat techniques. His instructor had praised his form, his precision, his natural talent for violence that would one day make him unstoppable. Drew had felt pride swelling in his chest, imagining the day he'd be strong enough to protect everyone he loved from any threat. He remembered checking the position of the sun, calculating that he had 2 more hours before he needed to return home. 2 more hours to perfect the killing strike his instructor was teaching. 2 more hours that he chose steel over sister, ambition over presence, future protection over present love. The messenger had arrived covered in ash and blood, his words tumbling out in fragments. Rogue faction. Surprise attack. Military families targeted. Casualties reported. Drew had run, but running after the fact was just another form of failure. He'd arrived to find their quarters destroyed, walls blackened by fire, the air thick with smoke and screams. His father lay bleeding from multiple wounds, barely conscious. And Elena. Andrew's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Even now, 18 years later, he could see her so clearly. Her small body broken by violence meant for warriors. Her curls matted with blood. Her eyes finding his face as he dropped to his knees beside her cot, and in those eyes he saw not fear, not pain, but relief. Relief that her big brother had finally come, as if his presence alone could undo what had already been done. He'd been training to become powerful while she died powerless. He'd been learning to kill while she was being killed. He'd chosen the promise of future strength over the reality of present vulnerability, and that choice had cost him everything that mattered. The healers had worked frantically, but Andrew had known. He'd seen enough training injuries to recognize when damage went too deep. Elena's breathing grew shallower with each passing moment, her small hand growing colder in his grip despite how tightly he held on. "Drew," she'd whispered, and he'd leaned close to hear her over the chaos around them. "Promise me you'll help other kids when they're scared." He'd promised through tears that no Alpha King was supposed to shed. He'd promised while something fundamental shattered inside him. He'd promised, and then he'd watched her slip away despite every oath he'd made, every skill he'd learned, every ounce of strength he'd cultivated. After that, Drew understood the truth. Love was weakness. Attachment was vulnerability. Caring about anyone gave the universe a blade to twist in your gut. So he'd cauterized those wounds with ruthlessness, building his rule on the ashes of the boy who'd once believed protection meant anything more than overwhelming force. The scarred tissue on his face was nothing compared to what he'd done to his own heart. Another message lit up the screen. "I'm scared I'm going to sleep now." Andrew's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. Not tonight. Not again. Never again. He knew that tone. He'd heard it in his sister's voice during those final moments when her body had begun shutting down, when trauma had pushed a child's system past the point of fighting. Sleep wasn't rest. It was surrender. It was a little girl's mind trying to escape a reality too terrible to endure. If Lucy slipped into that darkness now, there was no guarantee she'd wake up on the other side. Andrew's hands moved with the same precision he used in battle, one steering while the other typed rapidly across the phone screen. His royal training allowed him to multitask even at dangerous speeds, muscle memory taking over navigation while his focus narrowed to the words that might keep a child alive. Stay awake.
Talk to me.
What's your name? He watched the screen as he drove, counting the seconds that felt like hours. The response came back slowly, each letter clearly requiring enormous effort. Lucy.
I'm Lucy.
Lucy. Andrew felt the name settle into his chest like an oath. This was no longer an anonymous plea from a stranger's child. This was Lucy, who was scared and tired and trying so hard to be brave. Lucy, my name is Andrew. I'm almost there. You need to stay awake for me.
Can you do that?
The pause stretched longer this time. Andrew's heart hammered against his ribs, each second of silence a small death. Finally, the response appeared. I'll try. 2 words. But they were enough. She was still fighting. Good girl.
Tell me about your mama.
What's her name? Andrew needed to keep Lucy's mind engaged, needed to give her something to focus on besides the fear and the pain and the overwhelming urge to let go. He'd learned this technique during his military training, how to keep wounded soldiers conscious by making them talk, making them remember why they needed to keep breathing.
Catherine.
Catherine Miller. She makes the best pancakes. She reads me stories every night before bed. Something cracked inside Andrew's chest, somewhere beneath the scars and the crown and 18 years of carefully maintained ice. This little girl, hiding in terror while her mother lay bleeding, was talking about pancakes and bedtime stories. She was talking about the kind of normal, beautiful life that Elena had been stolen from. The kind of life Andrew had convinced himself didn't matter anymore. What kind of stories does she read?
Fairy tales.
About princesses and knights. Knights who save people. Andrew's throat tightened. The streetlights blurred past as he pushed the vehicle faster, the engine roaring through the quiet neighborhood. His crown had shifted slightly from the speed, but he didn't bother adjusting it. Right now, he wasn't a king racing to impose royal authority. He was simply a man trying to keep a promise he'd made to a dying sister 20 years ago. Lucy, I need you to do something for me. Can you hide somewhere safe? Somewhere he won't look? I'm already hiding. In the closet. Behind Mama's coats. They smell like her perfume.
Perfect.
Stay right there. Stay quiet. I'm 5 minutes away. The response came back weaker now, the words taking longer to form.
Okay.
Are you really coming? People don't usually come. Andrew felt that sentence pierce through every defense he'd built. How many times had this child called for help before? How many times had she learned that promises meant nothing, that adults failed, that being small and scared meant being alone? I'm really coming, Lucy. I promise you. I'm a king, and when kings make promises, they keep them. He could almost hear her confusion through the screen, this little girl trying to make sense of a king responding to her desperate text. But she typed back one more time. Okay, I'll wait for you. But please hurry. I don't want Mama to be alone. Andrew's vision blurred for just a moment before he blinked it clear. The navigation system announced 2 minutes to destination. 2 minutes between now and the moment he'd finally keep the promise he'd made to Elena. 2 minutes to prove that sometimes someone really does come. I'm almost there, Lucy.
Hold on.
Just hold on a little longer. The house appeared ahead, exactly as the address indicated.
Dark. Quiet.
Hiding violence behind closed doors. Andrew Kael adjusted his crown, felt the weight of his ceremonial robe, and prepared to remind the world what an Alpha King's protection truly meant. Andrew stepped out of his vehicle, and the contrast was immediate, almost absurd. Here stood an Alpha King in full ceremonial regalia, purple and gold robe billowing in the night breeze, ermine trim catching what little moonlight penetrated the clouds, an ancient crown of battle-won steel glinting on his long-haired head, standing before a house that was falling apart at the seams. The porch sagged under the weight of neglect. Paint peeled from the siding in long strips like dead skin. One window was covered with cardboard and tape. The small yard was overgrown with weeds that reached past his knees. This was the kind of neighborhood where royalty never ventured, where problems festered in silence because no one with power cared enough to look. Andrew's mere presence here was a violation of the natural order, a king descending into the realm of the forgotten. Then he heard it, a scream, raw and female, and filled with the kind of pain that came from more than just physical wounds. It was the sound of a mother fighting for her life, for her child, with whatever strength she had left. Andrew's body tensed, every warrior instinct flaring to life. His hand moved instinctively to his side where a sword would normally hang, but he'd left in such haste he wore only the ceremonial robe over his regular clothes. No matter. He'd subdued enemies with his bare hands before. The alpha strength flowing through his veins was weapon enough. His phone vibrated one final time. Andrew looked down at the screen, and the message there made something savage awaken inside him. He has my bear. For words.
Simple.
Devastating. A little girl's last line of defense had been breached. Whatever stuffed animal had given Lucy comfort in the darkness, whatever small companion had made her feel less alone in that closet, had been discovered. Which meant the attacker was close. Which meant Lucy's hiding place was compromised. Which meant there were seconds, not minutes. Andrew didn't knock. Didn't announce himself. Didn't wait for permission or protocol or any of the formalities that usually preceded a sovereign's arrival. He simply moved. The door exploded inward under the force of his shoulder, wood splintering around the lock as if it were made of paper. His royal robe billowed behind him like wings as he stepped across the threshold, crown still firmly in place, every inch the conquering king entering enemy territory. The scene that greeted him was exactly what he'd feared, and somehow worse than he'd imagined. The small living room was a disaster zone of overturned furniture and shattered glass. A lamp lay broken on the floor, its shade crushed. Pictures had been torn from walls, their frames smashed. A coffee table was flipped onto its side. Blood. There was so much blood, splattered across the worn carpet in patterns that told stories of violence and desperation. In the center of this chaos, a woman lay crumpled near the hallway entrance. Catherine Miller, Lucy's mother. Her face was swollen and bruised, one eye already blackened and sealed shut. Her lip was split and bleeding. Her clothes were torn. She was trying to crawl toward the hallway, toward where Andrew assumed her daughter was hiding, but her movements were weak and uncoordinated. Standing over her was a man, large, brutal, with the stance of someone who'd done this before and enjoyed it. His fists were bloody. His breathing was heavy not from exertion, but from rage barely contained. In one hand, he held a small pink teddy bear by its arm, dangling it like a trophy. The man's head snapped toward Andrew at the sound of the door crashing open. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the violent criminal and the crowned king, across a shabby living room that had become a battlefield. Then the man's face twisted with confusion and contempt. What the hell are you supposed to be? Some kind of costume party freak. Andrew said nothing. He simply stepped further into the room, his presence filling the space like gathering thunder. His scars caught the dim light. His crown glinted with ancient authority. His eyes, those eyes that had commanded armies and ended lives, fixed on the man with absolute, terrifying focus. The Alpha King had arrived, and judgment was at hand. The man took a step toward Andrew, fists still clenched and bloody, Lucy's bear dangling from his grip like a taunt. You need to leave, freak. This is family business. Andrew's gaze dropped to Catherine on the floor. She was trying to speak, blood bubbling at her lips with the effort. Her one good eye found his face, his crown, and confusion mixed with desperate hope flickered across her battered features. She didn't understand who he was or why he was here, but she recognized salvation when she saw it. Family business, Andrew repeated, his voice low and carrying the weight of absolute authority. Is that what you call beating a defenseless woman while her child hides in terror? The man's face twisted with rage. I said get out. He moved toward Andrew with the confidence of someone who'd won every fight through size and brutality alone. It was the last mistake he would make tonight. Andrew didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need one. The alpha power that had been dormant for so long, the supernatural strength that came with his bloodline, the power he'd inherited from generations of kings, surged through his veins like liquid lightning. His eyes flashed with an otherworldly gleam, caught between gold and crimson in the dim light. The man swung at him, a haymaker meant to shatter bone. Andrew caught his fist mid-strike. Simply caught it. As if the man were moving through water, while Andrew existed in a different dimension entirely. The attacker's eyes widened in shock and then in pain as Andrew's grip tightened. The sound of bones grinding together filled the room. The man tried to pull away, tried to use his other hand, tried to do anything except feel his own strength rendered completely meaningless. Andrew moved with speed that defied human limitation. One moment he was holding the man's fist. The next, he had spun him around and driven him to his knees with a force that cracked the floorboards beneath them. The teddy bear tumbled from the man's grip, landing softly near Catherine's outstretched hand. You will never, Andrew said, his voice dropping to something primal and terrifying, something that resonated with ancient power. Touch them again. The man gasped for air, his face pressed against the floor by Andrew's hand on the back of his neck. The Alpha King's strength was absolute, irresistible, the kind of power that reminded humans why they once feared the dark and told stories about monsters. But Andrew wasn't the monster here. He was the thing monsters feared. Please, the man wheezed. All his earlier bravado evaporated. Please, I'm sorry, Your apologies mean nothing to me. Andrew's grip tightened just enough to make the man go silent. But they are not mine to accept. You will beg forgiveness from the mother you brutalized and the child you terrorized. And then you will leave this realm and never return. Catherine was staring at him now with tears streaming down her battered face, her hand clutching Lucy's bear to her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. Then, from somewhere down the hallway, a small voice broke through the tension.
Shaky.
Disbelieving. Filled with wonder and relief. Your Majesty? You came. Andrew's head turned toward the sound. There, peeking around the hallway corner, was a little girl in pink pajamas. Lucy. She was small and blonde with curls tangled from hiding, her face streaked with tears and terror. But in her eyes, those eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little, was something Andrew recognized instantly. It was the same look Elena had given him. The belief that her big brother would fix everything. The absolute faith that someone strong had finally arrived to make the monsters go away. Andrew's expression softened despite the violence he was currently restraining. Despite the blood on the carpet and the broken furniture and the man trembling beneath his grip. He looked at Lucy and he saw every promise he'd failed to keep, every child he'd told himself he couldn't save, every wall he'd built to protect himself from exactly this moment. I came, he said, his voice gentle now, the kingly authority replaced with something warmer. I promised I would, didn't I? Lucy nodded, taking one tentative step into the room, her small hands clutching the doorframe. Kings keep their promises. You said so. We do, Andrew confirmed. Always. He could feel the man beneath his hand starting to struggle again, starting to calculate escape or revenge. Andrew's grip became iron once more. Not yet. This wasn't finished. Lucy needed to see that the monster was defeated. Catherine needed to know she was safe. And Andrew needed to prove that this time, he wouldn't fail. Andrew hauled the man to his feet with one hand, the movement effortless despite the attacker's size. The man stumbled, gasping, all his earlier violence reduced to pathetic whimpering. Andrew's crown caught the light as he turned his head toward Lucy, his expression softening. "Lucy, stay with your mama. I need to have a conversation with this man outside. I'll be right back." Lucy nodded, immediately moving to her mother's side, dropping to her knees and wrapping her small arms around Catherine's neck. The sight of them together, broken but alive, terrified but reunited, made something fierce and protective surge through Andrew's chest. He dragged the man toward the shattered front door, his ceremonial robe sweeping behind them. The attacker tried once to resist, tried to plant his feet, but Andrew's alpha strength made resistance meaningless. It was like a child trying to anchor themselves against a hurricane. Outside, away from Lucy's sight, away from the innocent eyes that had already seen too much, Andrew's demeanor changed entirely. The gentleness evaporated. What remained was the Alpha King in his purest, most terrifying form. He slammed the man against his vehicle with enough force to dent the metal. The attacker cried out, but Andrew's hand clamped around his throat, cutting off the sound. "Listen very carefully," Andrew said, his voice dropping to something ancient and absolute. "Because I will say this only once." The man's eyes were wide with terror now, finally understanding that he wasn't dealing with a costume party freak or a concerned citizen. He was dealing with something far beyond his comprehension. "You are hereby banished from this realm by royal decree. You will leave this city tonight. You will never return to this address, this neighborhood, or anywhere near Catherine and Lucy Miller. You will not call them. You will not write to them. You will not think about them. As far as you are concerned, they have ceased to exist." Andrew leaned closer, his scarred face inches from the man's, his eyes burning with that otherworldly gleam. "If you violate this decree, if you so much as breathe in their direction, I will know. And when I come for you the second time, there will be no conversation. No warning.
No merci.
I will erase you from existence so completely that even your name will be forgotten." The man was shaking now, tears streaming down his face, all his brutality dissolved into pure animal fear. "Do you understand me?" Andrew's voice carried the weight of absolute sovereignty, the kind of authority that had commanded kingdoms and ended dynasties. "Yes," the man gasped. "Yes, I understand." "Then go.
Now.
Before I change my mind about letting you leave alive." Andrew released him, and the man collapsed to the ground, scrambling away on hands and knees before finding his feet and running. Running like demons pursued him. Running like he'd never run before. The sound of his footsteps faded into the night, and Andrew stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the alpha power settle back beneath his skin. When he returned inside, Lucy was still holding her mother, but both of them looked up as he entered. Andrew closed the door behind him, or tried to, but the broken frame wouldn't hold it. He'd have to arrange repairs. He'd have to arrange so many things. But first this. Andrew approached slowly, mindful of not frightening Lucy with sudden movements. When he reached them, he did something no one in his kingdom had ever seen their Alpha King do. He knelt, lowered himself to Lucy's eye level, his crown tilting slightly, his long hair falling forward around his scarred face. "Lucy," he said softly, "do you see these marks on my face?" Lucy nodded, her eyes tracing the 3 deep scars that ran from his temple to his jaw. "I got these a long time ago, when I failed to protect someone very important to me. Someone small and brave, just like you. Her name was Elena, and she was my little sister." Lucy's eyes widened. "What happened to her?" "She died, because I wasn't there when she needed me most. And before she left, she made me promise something. She made me promise that I would help other kids when they're scared. That I would use my strength to protect the smallest and the most vulnerable." Andrew reached out slowly, giving Lucy time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he gently touched the top of her head. These scars remind me every single day of that promise. They remind me why I carry this crown. Not to rule with fear, but to protect with honor. Lucy was crying now, but they were different tears. Not terror. Not trauma. Something softer. "So you really are a king?" she whispered. "I really am. And you, Lucy Miller, have just become one of my protected subjects. Which means no one will ever hurt you or your mama again. I give you my royal word." Lucy threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking his crown askew. Andrew stiffened for just a moment. He couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged him, and then his arms came up to hold her small form carefully, protectively. Over Lucy's shoulder, Catherine was watching with her one good eye, tears streaming down her battered face, mouthing the words, "Thank you," over and over. Andrew closed his eyes and held the little girl who'd texted a king by mistake and somehow found exactly who she needed. The promise had been kept. Finally, after 20 years, the promise had been kept. Andrew stayed until dawn. He made calls on his encrypted phone, his voice low and commanding as he mobilized resources that most people didn't know existed. Within an hour, a discreet medical team arrived, his kingdom's healers who moved between the ordinary world and the supernatural one, asking no questions and leaving no traces. They treated Catherine's injuries with skill and supernatural efficiency, their methods far more effective than any hospital emergency room. While they worked, Andrew sat with Lucy on the worn couch that had been righted, her small body curled against his side, his ceremonial robe wrapped around her like a protective blanket. She'd fallen asleep there, exhausted from fear and relief, one small hand clutching the fabric of his sleeve as if afraid he might disappear. By sunrise, arrangements had been made. A safe house in a better neighborhood, one of many properties his network maintained for exactly these purposes. New identities if needed. Security details that would watch from the shadows. Financial support that would arrive through untraceable channels. Catherine Miller would never have to worry about rent or safety or where her next meal came from ever again. Andrew had built an empire of shadows and strength. Tonight, he'd learned what it was truly for. 6 months later, the weekly ritual had become sacred to Andrew in ways his royal duties never were. Every Thursday evening, he would slip away from his kingdom's endless demands, from territorial disputes and political maneuvering, from the weight of the crown that never truly left his head even when he removed it. He would drive to the house he'd secured for Catherine and Lucy, a modest but comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and safe streets. The kind of place where children rode bicycles and neighbors waved to each other. The kind of place Elena should have grown up in. This Thursday, like all the others, Andrew found Lucy waiting on the front porch. She was bigger now, healthier, her face bright with a smile that came easily these days. The nightmares had faded, the trauma slowly healing under the combined weight of safety, therapy, and the absolute certainty that someone powerful was watching over her. "My king," she called out as his vehicle pulled up, and Andrew felt that same crack in his chest he felt every time he heard those words. Not "Your Majesty," with the formal distance of a subject. Not Alpha King, with the fear of a subordinate. Just "my king." Possessive and affectionate, the words of a child who'd claimed him as her protector. Andrew stepped out, his long hair tied back today, the scars on his face catching the golden evening light. He wasn't wearing his ceremonial robe or crown. Those remained in his kingdom, but Lucy never seemed to need the regalia to see who he truly was. She ran to him, and he caught her easily, lifting her up as she laughed. The sound still surprised him sometimes.
Joy.
Pure and uncomplicated. The kind of sound he'd forgotten could exist in his world of shadows and sovereignty. "I got an A on my spelling test," Lucy announced proudly. "Of course you did. You're brilliant." Andrew set her down and walked with her toward the house, her small hand in his large one. Catherine appeared in the doorway, her face fully healed now, only faint scars remaining to tell the story of that night. She smiled at Andrew with gratitude that had never dimmed. "Stay for dinner? I made pot roast." "I'd be honored," Andrew replied, and he meant it. Inside, the house smelled like home, something Andrew barely remembered. They ate together at a simple kitchen table, Lucy chattering about school and friends and the new book she was reading. Andrew listened, offering advice on dealing with difficult classmates and praising her latest artwork that hung on the refrigerator. After dinner, as was tradition, Lucy brought out her storybook. The same book of fairy tales Catherine used to read to her. But now Lucy read to Andrew, her voice confident and clear, telling him stories about knights who saved people and kings who used their power for good. When she reached the end of the chapter, Lucy looked up at him with those trusting eyes. "The king in this story isn't as good as you." Andrew's throat tightened. "Why is that?" "Because he only protects people in his kingdom. But you protect everyone who needs it. That's what real kings do." Later, as Andrew drove back toward his hidden realm, his secured phone buzzed with urgent messages about territorial disputes and resource allocations. His kingdom still needed him. His throne still demanded his presence. The weight of rule still pressed down on his shoulders. But now, that weight felt different. Purpose had replaced burden. The crown he wore wasn't just a symbol of power accumulated through strength and fear.
It was a promise.
A reminder. A vow to a dying sister that had finally been fulfilled and would continue to be fulfilled for as long as he drew breath. Andrew Kael was still the Alpha King, fierce, scarred, feared by enemies and respected by allies. His rule was still absolute. His power was still unmatched. But now, every Thursday evening, a little girl with blonde curls waited on a front porch for her king to arrive. And in protecting her, in ensuring her safety and happiness, Andrew had discovered what sovereignty truly meant. Not dominion over the strong, but guardianship of the vulnerable. Not the power to inspire fear, but the strength to provide hope. The scars on his face would always remain, marking him as someone who had failed once and refused to fail again. And somewhere, in whatever realm existed beyond this one, Andrew hoped Elena knew. He'd kept his promise, and he would keep it forever. The Alpha King had found his true purpose, and it was everything. If you enjoyed this journey, show some love with a like and stick around. Also drop the name of the country you are watching from and subscribe so you're here for the next story I drop.